Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends, family, and colleagues from across the sea. This is Dan Diker, President, Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. I'm sitting here with my distinguished friend and colleague, Maurice Hirsch. You can pull in, Maurice, so everyone can see you. Lieutenant Colonel Reserve Maurice Hirsch, and Senior Fellow, Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, and our distinguished guest today, the Mayor of the city of Efrat, Mayor Oded Revivi himself, a Lieutenant Colonel in the IDF. We have many things to talk about. First, at the top of the hour, we want to report to you the tragic loss of Moshe Leiter, the son of our former Director General Yechiel Leiter, in a very difficult battle in northern Gaza. There were a number of members of this very elite unit that fell in a following it was actually the Hamas had placed
booby trap tunnel we were discussing on Thursday with Amir,
and our team just returned from the funeral of Moshe Leiter, Hashem Yikom Damo. So it's a very difficult day, but nonetheless, things don't stop heating up in the northern border. A number of an anti-tank missile attack from Lebanon that had wounded 6 Israelis. And yesterday, as I said, a number of Israelis were killed, special units in northern Gaza. We had also in a speech yesterday, Hassan Nasrallah talked actually in an act of the continued grand deception and disinformation of the Hezbollah and the Iranian-sponsored proxies. He's talking about really creating destabilization and subversion and global protests around the world in an attempt to isolate and subvert Israel, using all of these Hamas cheerleaders, what they really are, Hamas Hezbollah cheerleaders. And many don't know that they're actually cheerleading and are pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah, pro-Iranian regime protesters around the world.
And we saw it en masse all over Europe. We saw 500,000 people marching in London, many of them shouting the chant for the destruction of Israel. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Most people not even understanding what that actually means and what the goal of that war cry is. That's what we saw around the world. Closer to home, we also saw not a small amount of violence going on also around and in around Jerusalem, and again in Yehuda Shomron. And Mayor Revivi, we can talk to him about that. One of the other things, Dan, which came up over the weekend, and I hope Mayor Revivi will be able to address as well, is this argument of constantly the whataboutism. Well, the terrorists attacked on one side, but Israel has to constantly rein in these violent settlers, as has been constantly said. And with the statistics coming out this weekend from the Israeli police, that actually the last period has seen a tremendous drop to half, really cut in half. The incidence of reported violence, obviously any violence from the residents of Judea and Samaria, which includes us, is unacceptable. But the numbers going down, as opposed to the rhetoric that we're hearing along the way. Just to give that recap of what's going on in the different areas, as you said, Gaza, the continuation of the fighting up on the north, casualties as well with Hezbollah. In Judea and Samaria, I saw the number this morning that the army has reported that in the last month they've arrested over 1,500 terrorists that were moving around Judea and Samaria freely before that. And in Israel, we're seeing that relative calm, specifically amongst the Israeli Arab population, which is for now quite positive. The prayers on the Temple Mount, which we know are sometimes a cause for flare-ups, went by on Friday without incident almost, and so now we're talking about this is the what they say in Hebrew, the shigra, the day-to-day of Israel's war. Rockets and missiles keep on flying in, missiles from Hezbollah. I'm cautious with the use of that word, and from that we saw coming over. Really, we reported about it on Thursday, but continuing the report was a rocket, a missile fired from the north, from Syria. It came all the way down the Jordan Valley on the Jordanian side and then hit the school in Eilat. This is what we're seeing, and the firing of rockets constantly into Israel by the terrorists in Gaza.
So one of the things we want to do, Maurice, that we've been doing for the last, almost 40 days, 36 days, 36 days, is to try to get context and perspective and analysis on what's going on. And I think that when it comes to Judea and Samaria, there's no one better to create context than Mayor Oded Revivi. Actually, it should be said in the name of transparency that both you and I live in Efrat, in the municipality of Efrat, which is a thriving city in Gush Etzion that actually had been established by the Labor Party in the mid-70s, and today one of the most popular bedroom communities under Mayor Revivi's leadership. Efrat has grown enormously to be really a model city from the point of view of effectiveness, as well as I would call it Jewish-Arab relations in the entire area of Gush Etzion. Mayor Revivi, it's a pleasure to have you on the update, what we call the wartime diplomacy update today. Thank you for coming into the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs in the middle of Jerusalem on this very difficult day for Am Yisrael. As we were talking about outside just before we got on the program, the level of tension is substantial throughout Judea and Samaria. You are known as a mayor that has done everything possible to encourage Jewish-Arab collaboration, cooperation, understanding, hiring local Arabs to work in Efrat, as well as being known really as, I don't like to use the word moderate, it's a strange word, but someone who really encourages understanding between the Jewish and the Arab residents of Gush Etzion and beyond. How do we understand the tensions from where you sit as mayor of one of the largest cities in Judea and Samaria, and what does it mean? How does it play into this mix of the Gaza war of tensions up in the north?
So if I can just go to the 5th of October, 2 days before the 7th of October, in my house, we had the annual gathering of Palestinian leaders with the head of the central district of the IDF, a general, in my house, with commanders of the police, with tens of residents from Efrat, having our social national annual gathering during the festival of Sukkot. And if any of us would have imagined that what would have happened on the 7th of October and ever since then, you wouldn't have believed that that's what happened actually on the 5th of October, 2 days before that horrific attack. At the moment, I think there's no difference between the residents of Efrat, the residents of Judea and Samaria, the residents of Bat Yam, or the residents of Afula. All Israelis were hit by a complete shock of the severity of the attack, the brutality of the attackers, and the amount of attackers that has put, if we are very cautious in generalizing, the vast majority of Israeli people not wanting to see any relationship with any Arabs. Now, I know that what I'm saying is very drastic, but if you have residents in Bat Yam, which is south of Tel Aviv, driving the mayor crazy that they're afraid that they're going to be invaded by the sea, that's a reality which they never thought of. If you have residents of Afula inquiring more and more guns because they were never protected and they never had first response teams in their cities, you understand that the whole society in Israel saw the pictures. And this is not the classified video that only a few people were allowed to see. They saw what was on Telegram, what was on social media. They are now having nightmares that this is going to happen in their own region. And as a mayor, I can tell you that you can't say any scenario is something which is beyond expectation. You have to prepare the city and the residents for the worst case scenario. Obviously, the IDF doesn't have enough manpower and enough equipment to provide the same level of protection at the southern border, in the northern border, and in Judea and Samaria, which is way more complex. And the residents know it, and that's why we have more and more people acquiring guns, buying rifles, buying handguns, under the understanding that we need to be strong and prepare ourselves for a worst case scenario. And at the moment, not interested in any engagement with any type of Arabs in any type of mechanism.
So you've experienced that new reality in your discussions with other mayors, no matter where, whether it's within the 67 lines, outside the 67 lines, that people have become, they used the term Islamophobic, but Arabophobic because of this unprecedented barbarism and violence that happened on October the 7th.
It's not just the attack. It's also the pictures of the attackers coming back to Gaza and the reception they got back in Gaza. It's also the complete silence of Israeli Arabs, not condemning, not going against it, besides maybe a handful of Arab leaders, but it's not the mass amount of Arabs who are willing to stand up and say, this is unacceptable. And in Judea and Samaria, it's always been more complicated. They were always more afraid, but even they are absolutely not standing against Hamas. They're what we say in acceptance by their silence. They're not showing any protest, which is really disturbing. A lot of Israelis have said, if we thought that we have any chance of engaging with you and developing anything, the fact that you are keeping silence and not going against this just means that you are supporters of it.
That's an important point, Oded, because we have to even explain also to our audience the Palestinian population in Judea and Samaria should be technically under the umbrella of the Palestinian Authority, which is technically, again, also meant to be against the violence. And they should have had the free opportunity to come out and condemn everything that was done. They're not under the control of Hamas, that they can't say anything under a dictatorship. They had that opportunity, and yet they haven't used it. They haven't.
Well, we have to be careful and not mislead our viewers. The Arab population in Judea and Samaria, they're not really free people, okay? The Palestinian Authority hasn't held elections for over 15 years because they were afraid that Hamas will actually win the elections. At the end of the day, both in the Gaza Strip and in Judea and Samaria, and this is after going through a lot of what I hear and read in the international media, saying, how come you're blaming all the residents of Gaza? There are 2 million people there. If there are 2 million people there, and they're not protesting against those handful barbarians, it means that either they're in support of them or they're completely irrelevant. And that's where the equation is. And these people don't live in a democratic society. They don't have freedom of speech. But I would definitely agree with you that they're not doing anything to show their resistance or their opposition to what's happening in any single way.
The difference that I would try and argue between Gaza and Judea and Samaria, and we see this in Efrat and Gush Etzion in general, the amount of coexistence between us and our Arab neighbors is tremendous. Going down, I always give it as an example, Rami Levy at the Gush Etzion junction, where you have
the supermarket.
The supermarket. It's a supermarket chain where you have Palestinians from Hebron, Palestinians from Bethlehem, Palestinians from Bet Fajar, all around. The Jews coming from Efrat, from Alon Shvut, and everybody just on a Friday morning doing their shopping together, everyone cordially, everyone together, and that's a reality which seems to have suddenly just burst in our face.
It's definitely burst in its face. From the 7th of October, it's of no existence. Rami Levy hasn't brought back, the owner of the supermarket chain, hasn't brought back the Arabs to work, because he knows if he'll bring back the Arabs to work, the Jewish population will stop coming to shop in his shops because they don't want any interaction at the moment with the Arabs. How long is this going to last? Nobody knows. But Israeli economy is based on Arab labor. Yeah. There are specific economical fields which are in complete standstill. Those of you who don't have property yet in Israel and might be thinking of buying property in Israel, you can just be upset that you haven't done it already, because property prices in Israel were high for the last 5 months. The last 5 weeks, all development has been stopped. If cities like Bat Yam, like Haifa, like Tel Aviv won't allow Arab workers to come back and build in these building sites, we'll have a shortage of building apartments. You have to understand that before the 7th of October, there were about 150,000 Arabs from Gaza who came to work in Israel, from Judea and Samaria, coming to work every single day.
And 20 or 30,000 from Gaza.
20,000 from Gaza.
So this is a big major loss of manpower, which at the moment, the average Israeli doesn't want to hear of them coming back.
Mayor Revivi, give us your sense also as a let's say aluf mishneh. You're as Sgan Aluf. Yeah, you're a lieutenant colonel in the IDF, not only mayor of Efrat. How did the 7th of October affect you professionally and personally? How do you see it from also from a strategic point of view, from a military standpoint, national security standpoint, and a municipal, political, governmental standpoint?
So I think the easiest answer would be on the mayoral side. What changed as a mayor? Okay, Efrat. For those of you who haven't been in Efrat, it's a long stretch of a city. From one end to another, it's 5.5 kilometers. The width of it at the most narrowest place is no more than a traffic circle. And for years, we were very proud of the fact that we're not surrounded by a fence. And for years, I've developed a lecture, which I used to say that fences create a sense of security. They don't actually provide security. And my greatest example was the Gaza Strip. I said that we built a fence in order for terrorists to stop crossing over. In return, we got missiles. So in return, we went to the States, raised some money, developed this imaginary technology called Iron Dome, and we stopped the missiles in the air at any time, at any pace. And in return, we got tunnels. So we went to the States again, raised more money, and we developed a technology that we can identify the tunnels before the people even start thinking about them. And then we got attacked by balloons and kites, and this whole new startup nation was completely puzzled as to how to respond to balloons and kites. The fence created a sense of security in such a level that these barbarians came on the 7th of October and they just cut through it. And in Israel, we had such a sense of security that we didn't leave enough boots on the ground to stop them crossing. If we would have had enough boots on the ground, we could have stopped them. They weren't that professional fighters. Any amateur self-response team that got their act together managed to stop them in due course. They got advantage where nobody responded against them. But if we would have had enough boots on the ground, we would have been able to stop them. In our city, I understood on the 8th of October that we need to make drastic changes. I won't elaborate about what we've done over here because it's a matter of your safety, and I don't want to jeopardize that. But we've raised within a week $2.5 million to promote our security system, to adjust to what's happened in the
south. To upgrade it. To upgrade it.
You can be grateful that you're lucky that we have what we have in our city. Other places don't have it. Other places are extremely vulnerable. Now, I was a commander of a tank unit. And when they closed my tank unit, and there was this myth that we don't need so many tanks. We can sell them to third world countries. And they actually shrinked the army year after year after year, and investing less in the army and taking the funds to other places, which are also important: education, health, social services. I'm not saying anything about the criticism about the funds going there, but there was definitely an argument that you're shrinking the army into a size that it won't be big enough to protect all the threats around. Now, the Prime Minister summoned us at the end of last week for a special meeting to share with us the fact and the warning that he doesn't want a second or maybe even a third front line developing, because the army can't be stretched between the south and the north with Judea and Samaria lighting up.
So what was the message of the Prime Minister then in that case? You're on your own?
No, he didn't say to us we are on our own. The truth of the matter is what he wanted was really to get a consensus declaration for the American administration that we all condemn settlers' violence. We all said we don't call it settlers' violence, and he said that he was the first one to convince the president that it's not settlers' violence, it's extremist violence, but we all need to condemn it together, because nobody has any problem with condemning extremist violence. He got what he wanted out of the meeting. But you could definitely see a concern within the heads of the security divisions, within the Prime Minister, that at the moment we can't stretch too much into too many front lines, and we need to manage it and make sure that the north doesn't develop, escalate into something that we can't control. We have to have the battle in the south completed. If they will have time, maybe go to the north and carry on there. But Judea and Samaria, which is just as much of a big threat, if not even a bigger threat at the moment, needs to be maintained on a low flame in order for it not to escalate into something bigger.
So that really brings into stronger focus the issue of Judea and Samaria. It's topographically much more vulnerable, even than you can argue, than Gaza and the surrounding areas of Gaza, because he or she who sits on the Judea-Samaria hill ridge, which is several thousand feet above the sea level, controls as a commanding sense of the plains below.
So traditionally,
more important than that, before we have to understand that the settlements in Judea and Samaria. Imagine a situation where, had some of the plans come to fruition of the international community and the Jewish settlements been taken out of Judea and Samaria, we would have the entire Hamas leadership sitting on Israel's border at the moment, without the settlements, which really are the anchor for every part of the security presence in Judea and Samaria, which is really protecting, as you said, it's that entire hill range that looks down on 80% of Israel's population and 80% of Israel's industry. That's the importance maybe of Judea and Samaria, and whoever controls Judea and Samaria really controls the heartland of Israel as well.
But we're talking about a lot of things that have basically bubbles that have burst on the 7th of October. The discussion that you two are having, the Supreme Court had back in 1974, when there was a petition against a place called Elon Moreh, that there were Palestinians or people who were claiming to represent Palestinians were opposing to the settlement of Elon Moreh by the city of Nablus, where we believe that Joseph is buried. And the government decided to drop the line of argument of security reasons. And they said, we're not building these cities anymore because of security reasons, but we're building them for other reasons. And basically, it's been since 1974 that the issue of security was put in the corner and couldn't have been mentioned, but those who live there, those who realize it, those who see it, those who understand proximity and response time, understand how this buffer called Judea and Samaria provides life for the central, for 80% of the Jewish population in Israel. And when we talk about the north, and when we talk about Gaza, the reality was different. There was Israeli presence in the Gaza Strip. So these towns that were attacked, these kibbutzim that were attacked on the 7th of October, were way safer when there was military presence in the Gaza Strip. When we're talking about the north, we had the security line. What was that buffer for? That buffer was that Hezbollah won't come closer to the fence and will be able not to shoot rockets. He shot today 6 Israeli people who work for the electric company, who went to maintain a power line that was hit by a shell, by their bombing, and they shot them with direct fire.
You were talking about the Litani line, which is 20 kilometers north, and that was the security line since 1982, and that was then.
But even then, we withdrew backwards and backwards and backwards, and I don't remember the exact depth of the last line. I think it was about 4 or 5 kilometers. It wasn't already 20 kilometers because we pulled way back from the Litani because of international pressure. But I think what most Israelis realize today is that there needs to be that buffer, that safe zone, that if you want Israeli residents to come back to live in the south, where they were hit just 35 days ago, or you want them to go to the north where they have been evacuated in order for them not to be hurt, Israel needs to provide those buffers, those safety lines, those safety security lines, that people will be able to live safely within our legal borders.
I want to mention to our viewers that there are 2 words that characterize precisely what Mayor Revivi is talking about. Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs has focused on them for years. They're called defensible borders for Israel. If you go on to Google and you put in defensible borders for Israel, you'll find for free in English and in Hebrew the entire analysis of the requirement of defensible borders for Israel. It's exactly what Mayor Revivi is talking about now. But today, it is more important than ever to understand what this particular concept was that, in fact, Yigal Allon talked about in 1976. Article in Commentary magazine. Not in Commentary, in Foreign Affairs magazine. He talked about the need for defensible borders from Israel, which came after the 1967 war, in which we almost lost the country had Israel not taken initiated action against 4 Arab countries. Now we're talking about the need for defensible borders, which Mayor Revivi called the buffer zone in Gaza, outside, around Gaza, in the north, and as well as in the Jerusalem corridor going down to the Dead Sea from Jerusalem, as well as in Judea and Samaria. This was a defensible borders from Israel was reflected in 1967 following the Six-Day War in UN Security Council Resolution 242 as the need for Israel to have secure and recognized boundaries. That was the UN nomenclature, but this has become a critical national security concept once again. Defensible borders for Israel. Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs did the authoritative work on that concept, and we're going to update. This is actually a piece of news. We're going to update those old policy booklets and bring this right into the center of the Israeli discussion, because this is exactly the consensus position that Israeli decision makers, government leaders, members of the Knesset must understand now, is the need for defensible borders. We're too small a country with topographical, we have a disadvantage. I
think it's important, Dan. I don't think most people understand that at its thinnest area, Israel is only 12 kilometers wide.
9 miles.
From Kalkilia to Netanya, it's 9 miles. That's less of a distance than the terrorists traveled out of Gaza to Ofakim when they were on the 7th of October. People have to understand that. I don't think most people understand that topography and really the geography of how thin Israel is, how much of a danger it's posed. You talked about Mayor Revivi about Afula. People need to understand that the distance between Jenin, Afula, and that whole area is nothing. The terrorist bombers used to walk across the fields in the area of Megiddo and simply blow themselves up. The distances are not. We're not talking about hundreds of miles. We're talking about, at best, 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers.
Let me just add to both of you. I think Israeli members of Knesset, Israeli political leaders, Israeli public understands that. Our problem at the moment is with the international community. And when we see the protests happening in Europe and the attitude that the leading universities took in the United States, that is something worrying, that these people fail to understand that what has been built on Israeli borders is a threat to the state of Israel that can bring to this distinction of the state of Israel. And that's why the Israelis are not going to give in or stop until we're sure that we can actually defend ourselves wherever we live, in Efrat, in Afula, Bat Yam, or in the north or in the south.
It's a very good point, Mayor Revivi. I think there's been a complete misunderstanding abroad, and that is the perception that Israel is so strong, has such a strong air force, has such a strong military by sea, by land, by air, that nothing actually could really threaten the existence of Israel. Well, what we saw in the barbaric, simple attack, this was an attack that could have happened in the 1970s. They cut through a fence, and 3,000 Hamas terrorists plus public from Gaza came in with machetes, with slippers and bikes and pickup trucks and walking sticks, and they came and they cut babies and children and women and burned families alive. This was not a high-tech attack. So what we learned from that is that this can be an existential moment for Israel. This is not. Mayor Revivi said in the beginning of our discussion that there has been a deadly precedent set with this attack, even from the point of view, a cognitive point of view, that the enemies of Israel, in the Hamas, in Hezbollah, in Iran, in all these radical organizations, understand that if it happened once, meaning if you could actually penetrate Israeli communities and murder 1,400 or 1,450 people, commensurate with 60,000 Americans in 24 hours, then it can happen other places. It can happen again. So it potentially is an existential threat, number one. And number two, it was a conventional attack. It wasn't a high-tech attack particularly, right? Yeah. So that really emphasizes the need that Israel has to have a topographical advantage. You have to have a geographical buffer. And we don't have that. We don't really have that maneuverability
I'll give you an example that even when you have the ability and the technology, sometimes it's not enough. During the first few hours of the attack on the south, people asked where were the Israeli helicopters, not
Right.
realizing that at that given time there were 2 helicopters which were on call. Those 2 helicopters were actually called, but the time they flew from their base to the front line, it took them already too long for the attackers to already spread out into different households. So the helicopters weren't effective. So if you don't have enough area to be alerted on, to be able to respond, you find as yourself that a 3-year-old, an 8-month-old baby, he's the protector on the front line because he was the first house to the border. He was the first kidnapped baby. That's how this has to be put in proportion. And when the President of the United States or other international leaders talk about a 2-state solution or talk about a ceasefire, they fail to understand the proximity, the brutality, and the severity of the attack to realize that these things are completely not on the table at the moment.
They also fail to understand one additional thing, and that's that there's no real difference between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. There is not much daylight between those 2 organizations. They both support the entire destruction of Israel. Just their immediate means are
just what they said in the meeting
somewhat different. Unfortunately, that dissonance doesn't appear to have necessarily funneled down definitely to the international community, who are still saying that Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority could be some part of the running Gaza after the war is finished.
Yeah,
that would definitely be running backwards.
It's true. As a matter of fact, our board member Sandra Gerber wrote a piece in the Jerusalem Post that appeared just today that says that why the Palestinian Authority cannot rule in Gaza. And I think it's an important point to reiterate and emphasize that the Palestinian Authority pays 60% about 60% of its budget to the Hamas-dominated Gaza Strip. Number one. Number two, they also commit some $350 million per year to an incentive program to encourage, and Maurice, you've been central in
encourage and reward terrorists.
To encourage and reward terrorists to murder Israelis, primarily Jews. Number three, they have Soviet and Nazi conspiracy theories running throughout Palestinian Authority media, school books, and public discourse. And so here you've gone from one barbaric problem to another savage problem, and there is no chance, or there is 99.9% chance that Palestinian Authority would never agree to go to Gaza, because they would be seen as the marionettes, from the point of view of the Arab Muslim world, as marionettes of the Israeli army and the Israeli government. So those people. And
you forgot to mention UNRWA, which basically facilitated everything. So
the United Nations,
right? Yeah, so we're basically left with nobody able to take control, and that's why I think the international community is quite puzzled as to where all this is going to go.
As we've mentioned here before, statistics. If UNRWA claims that 3/4 of the Gaza Strip are refugees, I mean, statistically, 3/4 of those who participated in the massacre were people who grew up in UNRWA schools, were educated in UNRWA schools, enjoyed all of the benefits paid to them by UNRWA, and this is the product. The product is genocidal barbarians that can decapitate children. That's what they've learned in the UNRWA schools. They didn't learn humanity, they didn't learn peace, they didn't learn tolerance. That's the product.
Yeah, in fact, our senior fellow, Khaled Abotame, who engages with us in these updates, has said the level of radicalization by the Palestinian Authority has been so high in Judea and Samaria and Gaza until they themselves, through radicalization, were thrown off of roofs and murdered and kicked out of Gaza back in 2007, that you have a generation of young people, and you can see it in Arabic or in English online, that say, we have to kill Jews. We learned that we have to kill Jews because the Jews stole Palestine, and the Jews controlled the world, and therefore we have to kill Jews in order for us to thrive in Palestine.
And just a month and a half before the massacre, Mahmoud Abbas was meeting in Cairo with Ismail Haniyeh, with the heads of Hamas, for that famous Palestinian reconciliation, as they call it, getting together all of the different Palestinian factions, as they call them, to one united government. The discussions fell, as they have done over the last years repeatedly, not because of a difference in ideology, but only a question of who would be the ones leading the call and leading the offensive on Israel. That was the product of those meetings. And that's something which is important to understand, that discussing the idea of a PLO, PA involvement in any type of solution is a problem. And paradoxically, we saw it in one of the statements of the Prime Minister, I assume, after your meeting yesterday, where Prime Minister Netanyahu said that in a just quote him accurately, if I may, that in Gaza there will be no civilian presence or authority that educates its children to terror and funds terrorism and rewards terrorism, and isn't capable of condemning the October 7 massacre. So I think that possibly came out of what he was feeling with and getting the impact from you, Mez.
I definitely hope so. At the end of the day, I think everybody knows what we want to reach. The question is how we reach it and who will actually govern there are still left with a question mark. And that's where we are at the moment. And looking at the pressure building up from the international community, there is a fear that we won't be able to complete the job, and then we'll just regret it because it will repeat itself sooner than later.
And that's what. And then finally, as we wrap up here, we've got a major challenge with the international community and Jewish community, because for 30 years we have engaged with something called the Oslo process, which I would argue, and which we've exposed at the JCPA through our booklet, Oslo with 30 Lessons Learned, Maurice, which you were, this was a project that you managed for us, directed for us, that in fact it was the Oslo conception of containing our enemies on the Palestinian side while trying to reconcile with what were called the moderate Palestinian Authority that actually led this pathway to what happened on October 7th and the Gaza war, which was something that the Iranian regime understood and something which they fashioned and which they pushed. But in fact, this is going to require a major, I would say, reconsideration of exactly where we are, what Israel faces with regard to the international community, because everyone is still talking about two states, where there is virtually zero support in Israel for this concept, because people who understand what just happened or experienced what just happened in Gaza very much understand that it could easily happen in Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the former West Bank,
or in Afula and anywhere else,
or anywhere else.
Because at the end of the day, it's easy to pinpoint at the Gaza Strip and Judea and Samaria, but we also have a problem with the Israeli Arabs. Not all of them are that supportive of the state of Israel like we would have liked to think so. And when they go and support their soccer team, they don't misunderstand and they don't do any mistake. They go and support their team with a Palestinian flag and not with the Israeli flag, which puts in a nutshell the challenges that we're having.
Major challenges, a watershed moment, October 7th, as we continue into November. And we're looking at many, many months of a situation that is evolving. We're very far away from a solution. So we really need to have this international unity and international cooperation and international understanding with our international Jewish family and beyond. So first of all, thank you very much, Mayor Revivi, and of course, all our dear co-host, Maurice Hirsch, and you, of course, from across the seas. If anyone's interested in helping to sponsor the latest version of Defensible Borders for Israel, please get in touch with us at Diker@jcpa.org. Or call us. You can see it, our information on our website. It's going to be a major project, Defensible Borders for Israel, and we think we'd like to put this on the center of the agenda for Israeli policymaking as we move forward, even though there is awareness of it, but now more than ever, strategic thinking has to dominate the day. Thank you all so very much for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time as we